Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and the iPhone 1, or the iPhone 2G as many people call it, was first announced 13 years ago today. And I thought we'd take a look at the design for those of you who haven't really seen one, and then we'll talk about how it is today that it's kind of transformed everything and show you the interface and things like that, and some of the wallpapers as well. And so the first thing is the design. In fact, this was one of my favorite designs up until the iPhone 4. With the iPhone 3G and 3GS that came after this, they got rid of the aluminum back, which I really liked. So we have an aluminum back here with a plastic base, and under this plastic piece is where all the antennas are for Wi-Fi and cellular, and so at the time it actually had pretty good cellular connectivity. We have our 2-megapixel camera on the back, and this camera was just okay at the time. It wasn't really that great, and it didn't do video either. Now on the left side, we have our volume rocker, just like today, and our silent switch, and the silent switch and volume rocker are both plastic. And these features have carried over to all of the new phones as well, but they're now stainless steel or aluminum. So with the iPhone 11, iPhone 11 Pro, iPhone 11 Pro Max, all of those things are still here, but they're still a little bit nicer than previously. Now on the top, this is where it's a little bit interesting. We have a headphone jack, and I apologize that it's a little bit dirty. I tried to clean it, but I wasn't really willing to scrape something off of a 13-year-old phone. I couldn't get in there well enough, and it still works, so I thought I'd leave it alone. But the headphone jack, you basically had to use the included headphone jack or buy an adapter because you couldn't just plug anything into here. And then we have our SIM card slot, full-size SIM, and then a plastic power sleep wake button. And you'll see this one is used heavily. This is my brother's phone that he found online, and it's held up pretty well given that it's 13 years old. Now on the right side of the phone, there's nothing. And then on the bottom, we have our 30-pin connector in the middle, and then we have a speaker and microphone. Again, there's a bunch of junk in there. You can't really get it out without possibly taking the bottom off and thoroughly cleaning it. Now, 13 years later, it still works and turns on. We have a 3.5-inch display. This is before Retina displays. And then on the top, we have our speaker, and on the bottom, our home button. So if we click it, you'll see it still turns on, and we get our wallpaper on the home screen. This is a stock wallpaper. And then we slide to unlock, which a lot of people still miss. So that slide to unlock was something that was shown a couple times by Steve Jobs on the stage when they announced this. And honestly, this phone has held up really well all of these years later. And as you can see, we still have the original grid layout, but we don't have our wallpaper in the background, and I think that was due to a memory issue with this phone. It just couldn't support that, so that came later on. Now, if we take a look at some of the wallpapers, if we go into settings, you'll see it does work. And then we can scroll and everything, and that was pretty mind-blowing at the time that you could just scroll and touch your phone like that. But if we go into wallpaper, you'll see all of the original wallpapers, and I'll link to these in the description so you can check them out yourself. But you can tap on the wallpaper and see it. You can't scroll through them, and you can set it, but again, it only sets on the home or the lock screen, not the home screen. So here's some of the original ones. We had a flower. We had the Mona Lisa, and a few other things as well. So a bunch of famous paintings and things like that. So that was the original for the phone. So again, I'll link to those in the description, but you can't see those all at once or swipe through them or anything like that. Now, when we go back into settings, it starts at the beginning again. If we go to General and then About, you can see once it loads here that we're at iOS or iPhone OS 3.1.3. So it's pretty old, and that was the latest version you could get on this. But it still works, and it's pretty impressive that it's still working 13 years later. Now, battery life on the original iPhone was not that great. I remember charging it around 2 p.m. That was better than many other smartphones. You usually had to charge them a couple times a day. And this one, unless I was using it very little, I did have to charge it throughout the day. But that's just what to expect with something that small in a small form factor that was pretty amazing at the time. But again, the battery life wasn't great. Who knows what battery health is at this point, but we're still on a 13-year-old battery, and it still works fine. I do need to charge it a little bit, but I'm surprised it's still working as well as it is, given that it's 13 years old. And everything still works, such as the iPhone part or the music part, so you can scroll through your music. And I remember being sort of blown away when they showed this for the first time. When Steve Jobs demoed swiping up and down through music, it was incredible. We have our artists here. And then if we rotate sideways, we had cover flow. And I really miss cover flow. I wish they'd bring it back. I think it was a great interface. If we go to, we'll go to this one. Can tap and rotate around, and it just works really well. You still have to sync everything through the connector on the bottom with iTunes or Finder now in Catalina, and everything still works. So if we go into the camera, we'll wait for camera to load. You'll see how slow it is, and I'll bring in the 11 Pro Max and we'll just take a photo of it. You'll see it's nice and slow. It was never really a great camera, but it was great that the phone had a camera on it. So it was nice that we had it. We'll go back to the camera roll, and there's not a whole lot here. In fact, here's an iPhone 6 that you can see I took a photo with it from a previous video years ago. And Safari still works, but wow, is it slow. So if you go into here, it's slow. You get that little grid pattern that if you're familiar with this older one, when it didn't have a lot of memory, you'd get a little grid and then it would fill in and load over time as you wait for it. So you'll see it's loading, but it's pretty slow and not so great. But in general, we still have the same layout today. In fact, I would love to see Apple update that. If we go to the home screen, you'll see they're pretty familiar as far as the layout. We still can't put things in the order we really want, but we do have multiple pages of apps and things like that. But unfortunately, because this is 2G, you can't really use it on the network anymore. It's not using anything really fancy. It was Edge internet, so it was really slow, and we didn't even have turn-by-turn navigation at that time. So it was a start. It was lacking compared to some other competitors, but the revolutionary thing is the interface that's held up really well to this day. We don't have notifications or anything like that, but this really sold me on the idea of smartphones at the time, and I ended up purchasing this after they released it and reduced the cost. Originally, it was about $600 for 8 gigabytes, and they brought that down after that. But you still had to sign a 2-year contract with what's now AT&T, so it wasn't the greatest of deals because it worked for AT&T and Apple. But considering this was $600 and you can get an iPhone XR for around $600 or an iPhone 8 Plus, we've come a long way, and prices, even though they're kind of expensive with the higher end phones, haven't increased as much as you may have thought they had. But in general, it's a great phone. It's laughably small at this point compared to the new ones, but it's something I missed using it, and it was really revolutionary at the time. And just a quick side note on it is when I used this and I would bring it out in public, it was almost like I was a celebrity. People would gather around me in a mall just to see a demo of how photos worked or how you could touch your screen and how you could scroll through things. People were amazed by that. So when you scrolled, they'd never seen it before. So really, for the first few months that I owned it, if I used it in a store, people would gather around and ask about it every single time. So it was sort of like you were a celebrity if you had this phone, even though it was just a phone. It was kind of interesting to kind of run through a demo. If you had one of these, people were really amazed by it. So I really think it's held up well. I would love to see Apple return to some of the skeuomorphic looks on it. I would like to see maybe a hybrid version of that. I've talked about that in the past, but the design overall is held up well, and it still feels fairly modern, but now with Android competing pretty well, and there's so many competitors, I think that's really pushing Apple to do something a little bit different, and hopefully we see that in the future. We may not see major changes, but hopefully we see something. But 13 years ago, this was announced, and then it released later on. I bought one, I think around August or September, I don't remember exactly, but it was amazing at the time, and I look forward to the new one every single year. Let me know what you think about the original iPhone in the comments below. Are you really happy with where we are today? I think this phone obviously was amazing at the time and really pushed us to where we are today, but with Samsung doing things like folding phones, or whether or not that's where we go with iPhone is hard to say, but I would love to know your opinion when it comes to what we have today as far as the modern iPhones and what you would like to see, not just for iOS 13 and iOS 14, but what you would like to see with iPhone 12 or iPhone 13 or iPhone 14 down the road. What do you think as far as the design? What features could they add? And would you like to see them go back to something like we have here? Let me know your thoughts about all of that in the comments below. I always love to read what you have to say about it in the comments. If you'd like to get your hands on the wallpapers, of course, I'll link them in the description, as I said earlier. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.